Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and today, as part of March Multi-Turret Madness Month, I'm going to build this SMK from Takom. Sure, it's not 5 turrets, but 2 turrets is still multi-turret, like it or not. This is a 35th scale model of what I think is a pretty interesting vehicle, of which one prototype existed. I'm no history surgeon, so that's probably about all the history you're going to get from me. Inside the box, we find a nice, long hull top. I guess you might say this is an inverted bathtub hull. This not only looks good, but being a large single piece, should help with the alignment of everything else. Like these bits. Okay, so these aren't the most interesting to look at, I guess, but they are still important, and they're very well made, and that is something I've come to expect of Takom, that the parts are crisp and neatly moulded. I've not been disappointed yet. Not only is the detail good and crisp, but you won't be spending a whole lot of time cleaning up mould lines and such with this kit either, though to be sure, they are there. They're always there. As you are probably very surprised to learn, I can't really tell you if the detailing is entirely historically accurate. I'm pretty sure the only one of these that existed was scrapped long ago, so it is probably quite difficult to verify accuracy. Not being a rivet counter, I'm fine with that. It looks the part, and as a model, the details and bits are quite nice. There's a bunch of chonky bits, like bolts and rivets and whatnot, that not only look interesting, but should catch paint quite nicely, which is a lot of fun when you're doing weathering effects and such. Well-made parts doesn't just mean good-looking detail, they also go together quite well with a minimum of resistance. There were a couple of parts that gave me a bit of guff, the main one being the mantlet on the bigger turret, but that is probably at least half user error. The rest is pretty good. There are 3 sprues with wheels and sprockets and such, which provides more than enough road wheels and an extra drive sprocket and idler. The running gear appears to be the same or very similar to that on the KV, so I suspect this sprue might be common with a kit that has a KV hull. I wouldn't say it's that important anyway, and it's time to move on to look at the tracks, and as you can hopefully see, these are individual links. I know some might find that upsetting, as did I, just a little bit. Don't get me wrong, they do look good, which is important. They don't clip together though, so they're a little bit annoying to deal with. We'll talk about that later. Here's some clear plastic. It's clear, which I would say is a pretty important feature for clear parts to have. These are just vision devices and a headlamp lens. Here's the towing cable. I know there's a lot to say about this and I could talk for hours, but in the interest of saving time, I'll just say that it's metal and a bit cabley. There's one piece of photo etch. You may know that I'm not a big fan of the photo etch, but this is simple and not really a hassle to deal with, so I'm not going to complain. Not that much anyway. Decals are also included. There isn't a lot here, but there's enough. I've no idea what that slogan says, probably something mocking people in tanks with only one turret. Single turret idiots. And of course, there are instructions. Very helpful if you want to know how the kit goes together. I've only built a couple of Takom kits before, but these instructions are pretty much what I expect. They're good and laid out in a way that's easy to understand and follow. Even old Herbert was able to follow along. There's some colour suggestions at the rear, which is about the only place colour is used. Not that I'm complaining about that, but it would be nice if there was a bit more colour. I like colour. Okay, let's use these instructions to guide us on a journey of gluing together bits of plastic. I start with the hull, which is quite large. I glue this frame thing into the vent here. It fits well, though it does flex a bit. I apply glue to all of the contact points I could find. This is where the photo etch mesh will go, but that's for future Herbert to worry about. I install these exhaust pipes next, and they pretty much drop right into place nice and easy. The handles on these hatches come next. These are thin, which does come with a little bit of fiddliness, and you'll certainly want to be careful removing any nubbins from them. They do go into place quite easily. There's also one at the front. Also at the front, we add a couple of the clear vision devices. These do have a particular way around they should go. I had a hard time seeing them properly to position them the right way around, either because they're clear or because I'm old and crap, but I got there in the end. They're probably all around the right way. I then install the hull MG. First, the barrel goes into the mounting. The keying is keyhole shaped, and it would be pretty hard to get this wrong. That assembly then goes into the upper front plate. You probably want to make sure that the gun is the right way up. There is a backplate to hold that gun assembly in place, but I don't think it's totally necessary having applied glue to the gun mount. I put it on anyway because why not? It probably won't hurt anything. I then glue the upper front hull assembly onto the hull, at the front, believe it or not. You may need to apply a little pressure here, but it should go into place quite easily. Why not follow that with the part that goes in front of that? It's a plate. Again, a little pressure may be needed, but this is not hard to get into place. The whole bottom goes on next. This is another plate that more or less drops right into place. There is keying which makes sure you don't install it too far forward or backward, which makes life nice and easy. With all of these pieces I've been adding extra glue inside, just to make sure the parts get a good bond. Also, so the glue god won't smite me. Here's the lower front plate. You won't believe it, but this is just as easy to install as the other plates, and you might also need to apply pressure. Surprising, I know. All of the same things apply to the rear plate as well. This is the lower rear plate, to be more specific, I guess. It might sound like I'm being sarcastic or something.
Oh, you would never do that.
But I really do appreciate a nice hull that goes together with no issues. Who doesn't? There is another rear plate, but instead of putting that on, I chose to install the clear lens in the headlamp body. Some of you are going to say,
But that's a mistake, Herbert.
And depending on how you're going to paint this, it might be. If I ever get around to painting it, I'll just paint over this. This is why I'm not worried about the plastic cement causing the clear plastic to fog up, which it does do. Instead of installing that, I glue the vision device covers into place here, at the front of the hull, where people are going to be sitting and presumably wanting to look out. This does mostly hide the vision blocks, but like the headlamp lens, I'm just going to paint over those clear parts too. Next, I install what I'm pretty sure is a horn. It is a little bit fiddly, mostly because the upper front plate kind of gets in the way of my fat fingers, but it does go into place, as does the headlamp assembly. There's nothing too tricky here, though this should be installed after the horn, mostly because it would get in the way of that part and be a very minor inconvenience, which is the worst kind of inconvenience. This very thin antenna goes here, next to the machine gun. This isn't difficult to install, though it may be a good idea to leave it off until much later. You can see it's very thin and would probably be quite easy to break. It's kind of surprising that I didn't break it. Next, I glue the photo etch grill into place. I've also, obviously, bent it. The frame it goes over isn't strong enough to use as an aid in bending the part, so you'll have to use a bending tool if you want a nice straight bend. This is one of those bits of PE that are pretty simple and inoffensive to those like me who don't really enjoy the fine art of photo etch. On the rear of the hull, I install this curved plate, which I assume is an air deflector to prevent excessive dust from being kicked up. And below that, brackets for shackles. There's a very obvious mounting point for these. There are 2 for the rear and 2 for the front. The instructions didn't say to put the front ones on yet, but I'm a rebel. Ooh. It's not going to hurt anything to put them on now, just don't install the shackles.
Then why are you installing shackles?
I don't know. Rebellion? Actually, it is fine to install them on the rear. It's also easy. The reason you don't want to put them on at the front is that they interact with the towing cables, and it's not time to install those yet. The upper rear plate goes on next, easy as you like, assuming you do like it easy. Now it's time to give this thing some mobility. I start with the final drives. There's a guide nub for these, so you don't commit the horrendous crime of getting them rotated around the wrong way. Straight to jail with that one. Next, I add the bump stops for the suspension, and if you think this looks simple, you're correct. It is. Then the swing arms go into place. These are also simple. The important thing to note is that these are different parts for the left and right side. If you mix them up, you'll probably have some regrets, and the properly assembled Trackset Society will point and laugh at you. How humiliating. The mounting for the idler wheel is probably the most complicated component of the suspension, which is to say, it's not really all that complicated at all. All you've really got to do is make sure you've got the correct parts, and that the second doodad, which is a track tension adjustment thing, links into the first part. Easy as pie. Pie. Anyway, now is a really good time for wheels, and there is quite a lot of wheels, though I suppose not quite as many as your average German tank. I start by installing the return roller mountings, that way they have time to bond so they can withstand the massive weight of the tiny little return rollers. Assembling the wheels is pretty simple. These are the idler wheels. They're made up of 2 parts, with some nice hefty keying. The drive sprockets are only slightly more complicated. There are 3 parts, and there's tiny bits of keying to join these two. The other keying here is a bit more chonky and easier to line up. We end up with 2 nice looking drive sprockets. They're so good I was almost tempted to build the third one, but I didn't. The rest of the wheels are very similar to the idlers. The road wheels even have keying, but the return rollers don't. I must have forgotten to get a shot of all the wheels put together, so let's just get to installing them. I glued the drive sprocket into place, which is pretty simple. Often it would be a good idea to leave the drive sprocket loose, especially if it has polycaps in it like this one doesn't. With individual track links, you don't have any specific predefined lengths that must be in the exact right position to worry about, so it's not going to hurt anything if you glue the sprocket into place. In fact, in this case, it makes it easier to work with. The rest of the wheels pretty much drop right into place. The fit is good, and there's barely any play, so you don't need to worry too much about getting everything straight. It kind of does it itself. The instructions say to install the tracks next, but I didn't really want to, so I didn't. I figured skipping ahead and working on the small turret probably wasn't going to hurt anything. The first step was to install the clear vision devices. Turret crews like to be able to see too. They like being able to see so much that they also get a pair of what I'm assuming are rotatable periscopes. These are 2 different parts, so be sure not to mix them up. The turret body is made up of 2 parts, which are very easy to put together. The join at the back was a little bit messy looking, nothing too horrible. I simply scraped it with my knife once the glue had dried, just to neaten it up a bit. Like on the hull, the vision devices get covers, which are exactly the same as the other covers. I then glue the roof into place. This is easy, though I would suggest either letting the turret sides bond properly, or just being careful when pressing this into place. You want the turret body to stay together, ideally. Armament for the turret is simple, and if you wanted, you could model it so that it can elevate and depress. It wouldn't be as good as if there were polycaps in there, but it could be done. If, like me, you are going to glue it all together, it's not a bad idea to test fit on the turret body and make sure that you're happy with how the elevation is going to be before you glue it all together. Then why not install the gun on the turret? It's pretty much just a matter of pressing it into place on the front of the turret, like so. The final step is to glue the part with the locking tabs into the bottom of the turret. Simple. Ooh, would you look at the time? It's time for tracks, which are, as we saw before, individual links. And they're not really that hard to work with. My main problem with them was that, while they do kind of link together, they don't clip together, and there's no pin for them or anything like that. And they certainly won't stay together well enough to handle being installed onto the tank. Not to worry though, they are still fairly easy to deal with.
So get to it, Herbert.
Maybe I will. The way I did this was to work in smallish sections. I connected an amount of links together, and wait a short while for them to start to bond, but not so long that they're rigid and unmovable. That way they can be put into place easily without coming apart. They can still move enough to be shaped to give the look of some track sag. It made the most sense to me to start at the top of the drive sprocket, because that's fixed in place, and we want to be sure the links will mesh with it properly. I then add singular, individual links around the drive sprocket. I then continue adding sections of track. I tried to do this in segments that were the same length as the area they were crossing, like the distance between the drive sprocket and return roller, or the forward return roller and the idler wheel. That way you've got a solid point onto which to join each section together. This is a kind of time-consuming process, because it does involve a good bit of waiting for every section to bond, though I feel like it was worth it. The sag is pretty close to what's depicted on the box, and that's what I wanted. Now it's time for the side guard thingies. The instructions say to add details to these before installation, and I figured, why not? First, this set of spare track links. These are their own part rather than a set of the individual links glued together. We are also instructed to add some tools. There's a saw for procuring the traditional Soviet log, a crowbar where crows get drunk, and just forward of those, a couple of shovels. All of these have little mounting pins, which makes things easy. At the front we add this extra bit of guard, which either has some damage moulded into it, or it's meant to be rubber. I don't quite know. Either way, the part goes on nice and easy. The guard for the tank's right side has different tools, but is otherwise assembled in the same way. Why not then install those onto the hull? There are some big slots and corresponding tabs which make this easy. It should also lend a bit of strength to this, and I'm sure if you wanted, it probably wouldn't be a problem adding the tools and spare track links and such after installing these, but the instructions told me to do it that way and I always follow the instructions. At the front there's a pair of side plates. I don't know what a tank surgeon would refer to these plates as, but they are shaped in such a way that they should be pretty hard to mess up too badly. I followed that with support brackets for the guards. These are pretty easy to place, though I did kind of get sick of it after doing 2 of them on the build stream and left them for later. I also installed one of the 2 brackets at the very front. These are quite obviously different if you look at them, but installation is pretty much the same basic idea. Next, I assemble a couple of boxes. I would assume these are for Russian snacks, or more likely, vodka. What else could they be for?
Tank stuff?
Unlikely. The boxes are easy to put together, and they are also easy to install on the hull. Now it's time to work on the second turret. There's another machine gun assembly, which is a lot like the one for the whole front, and that assembly then goes into this ring, which I guess is part of the mounting. There's a back part that gets glued on, and it probably isn't totally necessary, but it could be helpful when installing the gun into the back of the turret, which is what I do next. It's just kind of sandwiched between the 2 turret side parts. You may need to do a bit of nudging to get the mount sitting properly. It should be up against the turret with no gap. Into the turret roof, I add 4 more of those clear vision devices, exactly the same as before. I follow that with a pair of periscopes. The crew in this turret like looking around too. Unlike the other periscopes, these are identical parts, so feel free to mix them up as much as you like. The commander's cupola goes into place next. Nothing too difficult here, you've just got to press it in a bit. Next, there's a couple of tiny little hinge bits. These form the outer edge of the hinge for the commander's hatch. It made sense to put the hatch in place before adding the second hinge end. That way you can just glue the second one on without having to pry them apart to get the hatch into place. I'm assuming the pointy bits are to stop the hatch from flopping all the way down onto the turret roof, and not a stylish fashion choice. This here is the mount for the commander's MG. You've just got to glue this tiny handle thing into place, and then it's ready for installation just in front of the commander's hatch. There is also a smaller bit that should go to its right, but I missed that. I'll get it later. In the meantime, I install more vision device covers. It wouldn't be fair if these ones were to miss out on the covers when all the others got them. I then install the roof onto the turret body. I figured it was probably a good idea to do this now before adding too many more breakable detaily bits. The main gun and mantlet assembly is a lot like that on the smaller turret. You can see there's holes for the guide pins on the inside of the mantlet bit, and again, you could be careful with the glue and allow this to elevate and depress, but I chose not to. With the gun in place, I set that aside to bond, and then installed the bottom of the turret. This plate kind of speaks for itself. I mean, I'm not hearing voices, it's not speaking to me at all. While that's bonding, I glue these 2 pieces together to form a mighty ring of power. Or a turret ring, I guess.
Stop being a fool, Herbert.
No, I don't think I will. I then install the part with the locking tabs. This more or less drops right into place. You shouldn't need to apply any pressure, but maybe some extra glue would please the glue god. This little bit with some nice bolty details goes into place here. This may need some pressure to minimize gaps. Then, so there aren't 2 giant openings in the bottom of the turret, these platey things are installed here. Nothing too tricky, just make sure they're the right way up. Now the lower half of the turret is ready to be installed. But first, why not install the magazine on top of the commander's machine gun? It's a nice big plate that you could eat dinner off, if you weren't too worried about cleanliness. I think I'll pass. Time to glue the turret ring part onto the bottom of the turret. This is pretty simple, especially if you don't try to attach it backwards. Ask me how I know. You may have to add some extra glue and pressure to remove the gaps on these little side plates, or maybe fill them with putty later on. The main gun goes on next, and this seems like it should be very simple. It did give me a little bit of trouble, the main problem being there was too much of a gap between the turret and the mantlet sides. I did apply a lot of pressure, and they still ended up a bit crappy looking. It's nothing that a bit of putty can't remedy, but I did find it a bit annoying. Ah well. I follow that with this thin antenna. I left this until now to avoid breaking it, and having had to apply pressure to both the turret roof and the mantlet, I probably would have broken it. Here's the doodad that I mentioned forgetting about earlier. I only remembered it when I saw the instruction for installing the commander's gun. which is what I do next. It pretty much drops right into place, though you may have to give it a bit of a nudge so it's not lopsided. And there we have it, one more completed turret. There is still stuff to add to the hull though, like the towing cables. I bet you'd thought I'd forgotten. Nope, not old rememberful Herbert. These are pretty simple, like most towing cables really. First you cut the wire to the appropriate length, which the instructions state is 58mm. I cut mine a tiny bit longer because I'm a rebel. Also, I've just kind of learned not to blindly follow what the instructions say with regards to towing cable lengths. Something I rather appreciate here is that the cable is sized such that it fits into the plastic parts with no problem, and that is often not the case. Once the cables are together and have bonded for a long enough time that they won't come apart because of the tension in this, I install them onto the hull connecting end first. You can also see that I've added all the brackets down the side of the hull too. One problem I did encounter was that having that stowage box installed on the right side did make it a little bit harder to get the cable mounting thing into place. My solution was to cut off the guide tab and more or less guess at the position. I think it works well enough. Then at the front, all you need to do is loop the shackle through the end of the cable and then clip it onto the mounting bracket. I would assume this is a lot easier to do when you aren't also holding the model up so the camera can see it. The final step is to use the glorious and mighty locking tab mechanism to attach the main turret to the hull. And with that, the SMK in 35th scale from Takom is now completed. It is kind of a silly looking beast. I do of course mean that in a positive and interesting way. If you've been around my channel for a while, you'll probably know of my fondness for unusual equipment, and this certainly counts. Not only am I very happy with the way it looks, I also really enjoyed the build, other than the bit with the gaps between the main turret and the mantlet. And to be honest, in the video, it doesn't even really look that bad. The tracks were a little bit, well, not even annoying. Time-consuming, definitely, but once I'd started working on them, it wasn't anywhere near as bad as I was expecting, and I think they've ended up looking really good. They're some of the better individual track links I've encountered, and at this point I have encountered a few. It wasn't an especially difficult kit to build, not that I was expecting it to be. Takom seems to be pretty good at engineering their kits, so they're fairly friendly to put together. Maybe not suitable for a brand new beginner, but you wouldn't call this a mind-bendingly challenging kit either. Somewhere in between. Probably more towards the beginner end of the scale than the mind-bending one. As I assume I said at the start of the video, I couldn't tell you if this is a particularly historically accurate model, but it does look the part, and I'm sure for most of us, that's enough. This was a fun model to build, and very appropriate considering that it's March Multi-Turret Madness month, which is definitely a real thing that I didn't just make up because I had 2 multi-turret videos that were going to be ready around this time anyway. Nope, definitely a real thing. And in that spirit, why not drop by my Discord server and share some pictures of your own multi-turreted tanks, SMK or other. That'd be cool. Anyway, this video is probably long enough without any extra waffling, so if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section below. If you'd like to watch me build kits like this one live, I stream modelling a couple of times a week over on Twitch. This month, March Multi-Turret Madness month, I'm building a Japanese OI, which has 4 turrets. There's a link in the description. Subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing, share the video with anybody you think might find it helpful, and if you really like what I do, consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi if you're able. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.